Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today we're talking about the Praxis Social Studies 5081 test. We're going to go through some overarching ideas, also some specific test questions, and what you can do to pass this exam. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're going over the Praxis 5081, and you know that if you've seen any of my videos, I'm going to take you right straight to that blueprint and test specification because that is the best way to start your studies for any Praxis exam. So let's go ahead and take a look. We're here at the Social Studies Content Knowledge, and we have 5081. And let's hop down to the blueprint here. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. And you can see here that there are 6 content areas for this particular exam. We have U.S. history and world history and government here, and they take up the bulk of the exam. Each one is going to have 26 questions, and they are each 20% of the test. So 60% of the test happens in content categories 1, 2, and 3. And then we have geography, economics, and behavioral sciences. So behavioral sciences are things like psychology, sociology. So you are going to have a little bit of knowledge in those areas. Now, today we're going to focus on some world history. I'm going to go through some main parts of the world history and how you can attack that portion of the exam. But you're going to want to make sure you understand all aspects of this test. Now, very quickly, I want to go over one thing. This test is a beast, and it is full of content. Now, on other tests, like the reading specialist exam or the ELA for the elementary ed or other exams like that, the special education exam, you can use our good words, bad words strategy and working backwards strategy to locate correct answer choices and eliminate bad answer choices. But on this test, it's a little bit different. It's all content. You have to know the history, you have to know the econ, you have to know all of these things. Now, another thing to understand is that this test is like every other social studies exam. Every social studies exam is going to have a component of world history, U.S. history, political science, econ or economics, and some will have, well, definitely geography, and some will have behavioral sciences. Not all have the sociology and psychology stuff, but you're definitely going to see U.S. and world history, government, geography, and econ. Now, again, it's content driven. So some of those strategies where you're eliminating bad answer choices in our other videos are not going to work as well here. But I do have strategy for you to use when you're stuck on this exam. So don't worry. The first strategy is to really take a look at these test specifications. There is so much information here. You can see that all of this here, all of this information is fair game for the exam. They will put this info on the test in one way, shape, or form. So it's very important that you can talk through every single piece of this. Don't leave any of these undone, okay? You want to make sure you know all of this. Now, as you work through this, you're also going to want to take a look at the sample questions. And I love the sample questions. They do a great job. They also have detailed answer explanations, which a lot of other companies don't. And there's a lot of information in the answer explanations. So whether you get the question right or whether you get the question wrong, be sure you are looking at the answer explanations because there's always going to be something in there. You can see here just for question 1, it talks here, Lincoln feared that complete emancipation would cost the Union the loyalty of the border states, which are Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. Maybe you didn't know what the border states were, and there it is. That's not anything to do with the question. It's just more information. So you can see here that these answer explanations are packed full of really important information. So definitely check those out. The other thing you can do when you're looking at these questions is look at the answer choices and see if you can investigate the answer choices as well. Yes, I understand that there is only one correct answer. However, if you take a look at this number 24 here, you can see that the answer choices are Pennsylvania Quakers, Great Awakening, Chautauqua, and Women's Christian Temperance Union. You may want to look up those 4 different things so you have an understanding of what they are, because chances are they have something to do with the exam and they may show up in another question. So it's always good to take a look at those answer choices and research those. Often when I'm writing my books, I will look at the answer choices that they give here, and I'll write questions on, like this one here, C, you can see presentation to Chautauqua. I'll write a test question about Chautauqua to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. So you can do that too as you are studying for this exam. Now, beyond that is a really important part of the study companion, which is the study topics section. And for this part, it's on page 31. You can see down here. And in the study topics, it goes through and breaks down the specs, but then it has this awesome part about discussion areas. And you can see that they give you kind of some information and some things to do, like make your own timeline. And then it tells you, what you should be looking at, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s. Then it says other trends to identify: migration, technology, urbanization. These are words you're going to see on the exam. These are concepts you're going to see in test questions. So you're going to want to take a look at these study topics. Another thing I love is that they have these guiding questions. What were the main figures, arguments, practices, and impacts of abolitionism in the antebellum United States? What were the causes, events, and impacts of the Civil War? These guiding questions are going to help you so much on the actual test. And they've got the New Deal here. What are the legacies? This is all U.S. history. Then we get into world history, and you can think carefully about the periods in which the history is divided. And then they have other questions here. This is all really important, really good stuff. And it's made by the test maker. So this information is definitely on your test, and you're always looking for things you're going to see on the exam. This blueprint is number one. So make sure you take a look at that. Now, beyond that, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual content and some test questions and kind of show you how this thing is broken up. Today, we're going to talk about the world history component and specifically that first part of the test specs. And I have it broken out here. You can see it's the world history part, and it's the early world history. So we're talking about classic civilizations, 1000 BCE to 500 CE, 300 to 1400 CE, and so on and so forth. One thing you need to understand is there are 9 big eras in history, dating all the way back to the Big Bang and when the Earth was formed, all the way up to present day. Now, this portion of the test specs and this portion of the test deals with eras 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, era 4 is from 1000 BCE to 500 CE. Era 5 is 300 CE to 1400 CE, and so on and so forth, until we get to 1914. And 1914 is the end of Big Era 7, which is the start of World War I, which starts a whole other era, okay? So this part of the world history portion of the exam, we're talking about classic civilizations way back in the day. We're not talking about modern day here. Now, this is just 4 big eras. Remember, I said there are 9 big eras. And I want to show you a really good website that I'll link up in the description below that you can go to take a look at all of these eras. I found it while I was doing this video. This website is called World History for Us All. And you can see here, right up here under big eras, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and all the way to 9. We are dealing with 4, 5, 6, and 7 in our presentation today. But this is a great resource, almost like a Wikipedia. You can just kind of get some information here. It's a 1-pager about the specific times in world history. It's really good. I'm enjoying it a lot, just reading through it and everything. Now, of course, with history, you got to be careful. Everybody's got an opinion. But this to me seems very up to date, and it's done by UCLA. So it's done by a university, and I'm going to go ahead and trust UCLA as a source, especially if I'm studying history. And so this is a great place to start. And you can just kind of click around, search for keywords. You can even take pieces of the specs and search for keywords in here, and it'll take you to areas in history where that is. So this is very helpful, and I will link it up in the description. All right, so let's go back to our presentation. Again, we're talking about 4 big eras, and we're actually talking about 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the 9 big eras in history. Now, really quickly, you might be asking me, what is BC, BCE, AD, and CE? Okay, just quickly, we're going to talk about this. Back in the day, we used to say BC, or before Christ, and AD, which is Anno Domini. And I haven't used my Latin in a very long time since I was in Catholic school. So forgive me if I mispronounce it. However, now we use BCE for BC, which stands for Before Common Era. and CE for AD. We have substituted that out, and it is standard. Pretty much everywhere you go to get information, we're going to be using BCE and CE. CE stands for Common Era. Now you may say, why did they drop it? Well, the first reason is BCE and CE, before Common Era and Common Era, are religion neutral, and it's not centered around the Christianity piece, which was before Christ. And also, I think there was some debate, and again, this is not my area of expertise, about dates. And historians found that BCE and CE had more accurate dates or something. So they went with that. Look, we're not here to debate that. We're here to pass an exam. But I just wanted you to know, if we're saying BCE, that kind of lines up to BC. And CE kind of lines up to AD, but that's the way that we look at it. And again, there's this little timeline here. Of course, the bigger you go with BCE, you're going back in time. So 2000 BCE is actually further back than 500 BCE. It's like a number line here, okay? So I just want to make that clear as we move forward. Now let's take a look at that big era 4, which is 1000 BCE to 500 CE. And let me just go back to my timeline so you can take a look at it. That's going to be right here all the way to here. So a big gap in time, like a pretty big amount of years there. And when we take a look, we can see that it's this portion of the spec, so that first portion. And you might get something like this question here. Which of the following statements reflects the Confucian worldview that figured predominantly in classical Chinese culture? Now, Confucianism happened around 551 BCE to 479 BCE. And Confucius was the one who came up with it. Now, again, this is not my area of expertise. I know, just kind of a surface understanding. Some of you out there may be very well versed in this area. But in terms of the test, we do want to know that. So we are talking about way back into classical civilizations. And the Confucian worldview was all about observing rules of proper behavior towards others and the social political harmony. That was a big part of Confucianism. Now, having faith in God will be rewarded in an afterlife. That's kind of like the Christianity view. Life's ultimate goal is to escape suffering inherent in the endless cycle of death and reincarnation. Reincarnation is not really about the Confucian worldview. And then C, a quiet life of contemplation and isolation from worldly temptations will result in self-perfection. Again, self-perfection tends to raise a red flag, so I would probably cross that off. But you're going to definitely want to take a look at Confucianism because it is a big part of this era. And you may get 1 or 2 questions on Confucianism. So definitely check that out. Now let's move to another point in time, which is going to be right around in here. 300 CE to 1400 CE. So now we're past the BCE era. We're into the Common Era. And we're still in the classic civilizations piece. We're still way back in the day. But I want to show you a situation where you can kind of use your background knowledge to help yourself grab answers where you can. Let's take a look at this. In which of the following fields did Islamic civilization most influence Europeans at the time of the Crusades? Now, we have Islamic and Crusades. Those both have to do with religions. The Crusades were wars between the Christians and the Muslims. And again, not my area of expertise. You may have a degree in theology, which is amazing, but I know that much, right? And if I'm taking this test, I can kind of zero in on that. And I know that theology here has to do with religion, right? So go with the most obvious connection between the question and the answer choices. It's not going to be in music, mathematics, or law. Music would probably be attached to like the Renaissance or art. And so we would want to make that connection later in another question. But for this, we're talking Crusades and Islam, religion, and theology has to do with religion. So B is going to be the best answer there. So again, you don't have to know everything about the Crusades. You don't have to know everything about Islam. You can answer this question and get it correct. Let's take a look at one more question from this era. So we're going to stay here for just a moment. And I want to show you how you can kind of piece together different things to answer a complex question, all right? So it says up here, let's go here. Which of the following groups was converted to Christianity in the 10th century a common era, by missionaries from the Byzantine Empire. So we have a couple of keywords here. We have Christianity. We have common era, CE, so we know it's past BCE. And we have this Byzantine Empire. So quick history lesson here. The Byzantine Empire was kind of a breakaway from the Roman Empire, and it was part of the eastern part of the Roman Empire. So let me zoom in on this map right here so we can take a look at it. And you can see that the Byzantine Empire is over here, and it's kind of bordering the eastern portion, right, of the world. And isn't Russia over here? It is, right? So just by knowing kind of the geography, you can answer this. So the answer is C, the Russians. And I can get that from the geography or understanding where the Byzantine Empire is. But I can also do it by process of elimination. Let's talk about this. First of all, we have the Frankish kingdom here, or the Franks. That's going to be France. And notice that the Byzantine Empire doesn't even really touch that portion. So I'm going to cross that off. The Visigoths were Germanic. So they were part of Germany and the Germanic Empire, and they're down here. Now, there is a little piece of the Byzantine Empire, this little green piece here, but certainly there's more of the Byzantine Empire over in this area. So I'm going to cross that off. And then the Anglo-Saxons, they were way up here in England. And so they're not even touching the Byzantine Empire whatsoever. So I'm going to cross that off. And C is the best answer here, Russians, because Russia kind of borders that Byzantine Empire. And just due to location, the Byzantine Empire is going to gravitate more towards Russia. So C is the correct answer for 29. All right, now we're going to be looking at 1200 to 1750 CE. So we're looking at early European exploration when the Europeans came over to the New World, which is now the United States, Central America, and South America, and the Caribbean. The slave trade falls into this era. There's a lot going on in this era, a lot of early exploration. So let's take a look at this question. Now, this is a Nava Ed question. I came up with this one myself. And we can see we have disease, war, famine, religion. Let's take a look at the question stem. The Great Dying in the Western Hemisphere in the 14th century was caused by. Now, we have some keywords here. The Great Dying, obviously, it's such a terrible word, but it is what they called it. Then we have the Western Hemisphere and the 14th century. All right. Let's just think of the Western Hemisphere in the 14th century here, all right? Now let me just draw, oh my gosh, I'm going to draw a quick map here. So let's go here, right? And we have east and west, and then we have north and south, right? And we're talking about the Western Hemisphere here. So we're talking about, you know, the United States. Oh my God, this is probably not very good. South America, this area here, Canada up here. Oh my God, there's my terrible Western Hemisphere. But what happened in the Western Hemisphere in the 14th century? Well, Europeans, I'm not even going to attempt to draw Europe. I'm just going to make it a blob over here. Well, actually, I can't do that. Let me just make it a little bit nice. We'll do like a bunch of stuff here, and then we'll do Africa here. Oh my God, that's not the way the world looks, but let's pretend that's just the way it is. So what was happening is Europeans were coming over here, and they were hitting the Caribbean, they were hitting Central and South America. They were actually coming down here and getting slaves and bringing them over to the New World for as labor to build the New World. And what was happening here? Who was dying? The Great Dying. Who died? Well, the Native Americans died, right? All of the Native Americans in North America, Central America, and South America were hit hard, not by war, not by famine, not by religion, but by disease, smallpox, and other things that the Europeans were bringing over. Now, again, you may never have heard of the Great Dying, but the Western Hemisphere should trigger you to go, Western Hemisphere, that's the United States. That's Central and South America. We're talking 14th century here. So that's right around the early exploration days. They're bringing the diseases over. We do know that, smallpox, the plague, all of that, disease. Now, another thing to remember about this part of history is that disease wiped out everything, that the Europeans brought disease over here. And if it weren't for disease, we probably wouldn't have been able to conquer this area of the world, because The Native Americans were warriors. They could beat us in war if they wanted to. We did have guns a little bit later, but they were really skilled at war. They could fight. It was the disease that decimated them. So really, if you think about it, disease was on the European side because they had built up immunity and the Native Americans had not. So it wiped them out and made way for the Europeans to conquer this part of the world. So disease there. So we have a couple key words. We have the Great Dying, which is super depressing. And we know that there was a lot of death at that time. The Western Hemisphere, which is going to be the United States, Central and South America, and the Caribbean. And then the 14th century, which we know is early European exploration. So A is the best answer. And finally, let's take a look at this era here, 1750 to 1914, right before the start of the World War I. And we're thinking about this question here. And I'm going to get rid of that because that kind of gives the answer. I'm going to bring it over here. All right, so we've got a bunch going on here. I'm going to go straight to the question stem. I like to know what I'm being asked to do before I start getting lost in some narrative. So the quotation above describes group participation in an event that was most characteristic of which of the following. And we have the Quakers, the Great Awakening, the Chautauqua, and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. All right, so let's read the quote so we can answer the question. I counted 7 ministers all preaching at once. Some of the people were singing, others praying, some crying for mercy in the most piteous accents. So piteous means we should be taking pity on them. And so they're looking for, I guess, salvation, mercy, that kind of thing. We have some keywords here. 7 ministers all preaching at once, people singing, crying for mercy. All right, this definitely has to do with religion. So when we think of this is actually going to be B, the Great Awakening. Now, the Second Great Awakening was kind of a revival movement from the Protestants, kind of in the 1820s all the way to the 1870s. And it was like a revival. So it's going to be very much like, people intense preaching, singing, that kind of thing. Now for Quakers are a little more subdued. If you know about the Quakers, they're more of a subdued bunch, and they're probably not going to be crying for mercy in piteous accents, singing and yelling and all of that. So I'm going to cross off A. Chautauqua, it's kind of interesting because I actually had to do a reading passage for that for one of my other books, and that's how I know about Chautauqua. It goes to show you, the more you read, the more you know about things. But Chautauqua was a education movement where they traveled all around the United States. It was almost like a traveling circus, but it wasn't a circus. They taught languages, they taught math, they taught all these different things, and people would come and learn. So it was almost like a big education movement. So we're talking about God here, crying for mercy, preaching, ministers. So Chautauqua is out. Now, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was linked to social reform through their religion, and it was a little bit too late. This is not necessarily focused on women, so I would stay away from answer choice D and go with answer choice B here. This is the Second Great Awakening, the revival movement of the Protestants. All right, so that concludes our mini lesson on the Social Studies 5081, specifically World History. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and throw those below. Also, check out the description so you can get the resources that I talked about in this video. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video. Don't forget to subscribe and let your colleagues and friends know that we're here. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.